The air in the sprawling, gilded bedchamber of King Valerius V hung heavy with the cloying scent of lilies and something else, something fetid and undeniably human. It was the smell of decay, both physical and moral, clinging to the velvet, drapes and the tapestries depicting heroic, long-dead monarchs who would surely recoil from the current occupant of their ancestral throne. Outside, the perpetual gray drizzle of the capital, Viridian, coated the cobblestones in a slick, melancholic sheen, mirroring the pervasive gloom within the palace. Thunder, distant and rumbling, vibrated through the ancient stones, a prelude to a storm that felt long overdue. King Valerius, a man whose bloated frame now barely resembled the dashing youth depicted in portraits lining the palace corridors, lay sprawled amidst a nest of silk pillows, his face a mottled purple from overindulgence and ill humors. Sweat beaded on his brow, catching the flickering light of the beeswax candles, making his features glisten unpleasantly. His breath came in ragged, wheezing gasps, punctuated by the occasional cough that shook his entire body. He was barely 40, yet he looked a decade older, ravaged by a life lived solely for pleasure and devoid of all responsibility. His reign, now spanning 15 tumultuous years, was a testament not to governance, but to an unprecedented unraveling of decorum, piety, and common decency. A half-empty goblet of ruby wine, its surface filmed with dust, lay precariously on a carved oak nightstand, perilously close to tipping. Scattered beside it were crumbs of rich pastry and a discarded love token, a soiled ribbon, once vibrant crimson, now faded and limp. The chamber itself was a monument to his debauchery. Clothes lay strewn across chairs, their costly fabrics wrinkled and stained. Half-eaten plates of food sat on precarious stacks of books, attracting flies that buzzed lazily in the humid air. The opulence was there, certainly, but it was buried under layers of neglect and filth, a reflection of the man who occupied it. Lord Lysander, the king's long-suffering chancellor, stood stiffly by the foot of the bed, his slender frame rigid with barely concealed exasperation. His usually impeccable gray doublet was slightly askew, and a single strand of dark hair had escaped its customary neatness, falling across his worried brow. He had been summoned, as he was most mornings, to deliver dispatches of state, only to find the king in yet another state of stupor. Lysander, a man of unwavering loyalty and profound, if often unrewarded diligence, felt the creeping tendrils of despair tighten around his heart. He had served Valerius's father, a king of stern piety and sharp intellect, and the contrast between the two monarchs was a daily, agonizing torment. "Your Majesty," Lysander began, his voice a low, carefully modulated rumble, designed not to startle the slumbering beast. "Forgive my intrusion, but matters of state demand your attention." He gestured subtly to the stack of scrolls held by his accompanying clerk, each sealed with the official wax of various disgruntled provinces and increasingly desperate foreign emissaries. A guttural groan escaped Valerius. He stirred, his eyelids fluttering open, revealing bloodshot eyes that struggled to focus. He blinked, slowly, like an ancient lizard. "Matters of state, Lysander?" he slurred, his voice thick with sleep and wine. "Always matters of state. Can a king not have his rest?" He attempted to push himself higher on the pillows, a feat that seemed to require immense effort, his corpulent body struggling against itself. "The eastern provinces, Your Majesty, are on the verge of open revolt," Lysander pressed on, ignoring the king's petulance. "The Duke of Volkov refuses to pay his levies, citing the famine and your recent decrees regarding the grain stores." Valerius waved a dismissive hand, a gesture of surprising speed despite his bulk. "Volkov always complains. Let him complain. Are there no more dancers, Lysander? The one with the emerald eyes, She pleased me well last night. Send for her again." Lysander's jaw tightened. He counted to 3, silently, a trick he had learned to prevent the raw frustration from spilling over. "Your Majesty, the treasury is nearly empty. The war with the northern kingdoms, though concluded, left us deeply indebted, and your extraordinary expenses have drained what little remained. The people starve in the streets of Viridian. They whisper of discontent, of revolution. At the mention of revolution, a flicker of something, perhaps fear, perhaps annoyance, crossed Valerius's face. He sat up a little further, wincing. Whispers. They dare to whisper. I am their king, chosen by God. He pounded a fist lightly. On the mattress, a faint cloud of dust rising from the silk. They should be grateful for the peace I have brought them, for the diversions I provide. The peace came at a terrible price, sire, Lysander said, his voice laced with uncharacteristic sharpness. And the diversions, as you call them, have emptied the coffers and scandalized the church. Archbishop Thorne arrived last night demanding an immediate audience. He is gravely concerned by your continued neglect of your royal duties and your private life. Valerius snorted, a derisive sound. Thorne, always Thorne, that old crow, seeks to rule the kingdom from his pulpit. Tell him I am indisposed. Tell him I am communing with God, perhaps through a different form of prayer. He winked conspiratorially, a gesture that made Lysander's stomach churn. The king's reputation for indulging in all manner of vices, particularly his insatiable appetite for women, both noble and common, had long since ceased to be a whispered scandal and had become a public, undeniable disgrace. His abandoned queen, Eleanor, languished in a remote northern castle, forgotten and heartbroken, while the court was a revolving door of temporary favorites. Your Majesty, the Queen's health is failing, Lysander ventured, seizing the opportunity to inject a note of solemnity. And your heir, Prince Alaric, is growing into a fine young man. Perhaps a visit, a show of family unity, might soothe the disquiet in the kingdom. Valerius scowled, his face contorting into an ugly mask of displeasure. Alaric. He is a pale, studious boy, more suited to a monastery than a throne. And Eleanor? A shrew. Always a shrew. Leave them be. They are no concern of mine. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. No concern. Now, are there any truly pressing matters? Or only the bleating of peasants and the clucking of priests? Lysander clenched his fists at his sides, his nails biting into his palms. The sheer, unfathomable indifference of the king was a constant affront. The ambassador from Eldoria, he persevered, trying one last time. He arrived demanding an explanation for the seizure of their merchant vessels in the Straits of Ethel. He threatens war, Your Majesty, if restitution is not made immediately. This seemed to finally capture Valerius's attention. His eyes widened slightly. War? With Eldoria? But they are rich, and their navy is strong. No, no, we cannot have war. Not now. I have plans, important plans. He seemed to be referring to some new folly, some fresh extravagance, rather than any genuine strategic concern. Tell him it was a misunderstanding, a regrettable error. Offer him a treaty, and perhaps a princess. Yes, a princess. From some minor house. That should appease him. Lysander stared, aghast. Your Majesty, we have no princesses to spare, and a treaty requires careful negotiation, not a hasty promise in the throes of a morning indisposition. Valerius merely waved his hand again, his eyes already glazing over, drifting back towards a distant, self-serving reverie. Just do it, Lysander. "You are my chancellor, are you not? Handle it. That is what you are for. Now, if you'll excuse me, I find myself rather peckish, and then perhaps a new entertainment, something exotic from the southern lands. Send word to Master Dubois." Lysander bowed, a stiff, perfunctory movement devoid of respect. He knew it was useless. The king was beyond reason, beyond shame. He was a creature of pure appetite, a serpent in the crown, slowly but surely devouring the kingdom from within. As Lysander turned to leave, the king let out another hacking cough, followed by a faint whimper. "Lysander!" Valerius rasped, his voice unexpectedly weak. This cough, it troubles me. Send for the court physician, and tell him to bring something strong, something to quiet the clamor." A chilling thought struck Lysander, one that had been lurking at the back of his mind for months, a desperate, treasonous hope. The king was ill, truly ill, not just from drink and excess, but a deeper, more insidious malady. Could it be Providence? Could the heavens finally be intervening to rid the kingdom of its scandalous burden? The thought was a dangerous one, but it brought a strange, dark thrill to his heart. For a fleeting moment, a vision of Prince Alaric, earnest and wise beyond his years, sitting on the throne, brought a sliver of light into the pervasive gloom. But then Lysander remembered the king's words. Something strong, something to quiet the clamor. He recalled the king's paranoia, his swift, brutal punishments for perceived slights, his deep distrust of anyone who might challenge his absolute authority. Valerius was unwell, yes, but he was also cunning and utterly ruthless. Lysander felt a sudden cold dread wash over him. What if the king's illness was not a path to liberation, but merely a precursor to an even darker, more desperate tyranny, fueled by fear and a dying man's frantic grasp for control? What horrors might Valerius inflict if he truly believed? His time was short if he suspected a plot, even one born of his own dissolution. The thought sent a shiver down Lysander's spine. The court physician, Master Alara, was a man of quiet solemnity and sharp analytical eyes, a stark contrast to the flamboyant sycophants who typically crowded the king's presence. He arrived with a small leather bag, heavy with vials and instruments, his face etched with a familiar weariness that came from years of battling royal excesses. Lysander had summoned him immediately after his strained audience with Valerius, and now stood by the bed, observing with a mixture of hope and dread, as Alara meticulously examined the king. Valerius, still flushed and sweating, grumbled under the physician's probing fingers. His breath was shallow, his chest rising and falling with difficulty, and a persistent wet cough periodically racked his frame, leaving him gasping for air. Alara listened intently to the king's lungs with a silver ear trumpet, his brow furrowed, in concentration. He pressed cool fingers against Valerius's neck, checked his pulse, and peered into his inflamed eyes. The chamber, usually a riot of noise and fleeting pleasure, was hushed, dominated by the king's labored breathing and the subtle rustle of Alara's starched linen. After a prolonged examination, Alara straightened, his gaze meeting Lysander's. Across the king's inert form, there was a subtle shake of his head, almost imperceptible, yet it sent a fresh wave of despair through the chancellor. The unspoken message was clear. The news was not good. "Well, Master Alara?" Valerius rasped, his voice hoarse, a hint of his usual imperiousness struggling through his discomfort. "What say you? Is it merely a chill, some fleeting humors that require a purge?" He attempted a weak smile, but it twisted into a grimace of pain. Alara hesitated. His gaze briefly flickered to Lysander before settling on the king. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice calm, professional, yet carrying an underlying gravity that chilled the air. "The humors are indeed unbalanced, greatly so. But this is more than a chill. Your lungs, they are heavy, congested, and your fever, though intermittent, speaks of a deeper affliction within your blood. He did not use the common parlance of ague or flux, but instead chose words that hinted at something more profound, more entrenched. Valerius's eyes narrowed. "Speak plainly, man. What is it? Am I to be laid low by some peasant's malady?" His voice rose, tinged with a petulant fear. "It appears, Your Majesty," Ilara continued, his gaze unwavering, "to be a putrid fever, aggravated by the humors and a considerable weakening of the vital organs, particularly the heart and lungs. The years of strenuous living have taken their toll." The physician's words were carefully chosen, avoiding direct accusations of debauchery, yet hinting at the true cause of the king's decline. Lysander felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "Putrid fever?" he interjected, his voice barely a whisper. "Is there a cure, Master Ilara?" Ilara turned to Lysander, his eyes holding a profound weariness. "We can attempt to ease the symptoms, Lord Chancellor. Bleeding, purges, soothing tinctures for the fever and the cough. But the constitution of His Majesty is greatly weakened. The body fights a losing battle against itself. The humors are quite corrupted." He used the technical terms of their age, a language that only hinted at the terrifying reality without explicitly stating it. Valerius, however, seemed to grasp the underlying meaning. His purple face paled further, and his eyes, usually so arrogant, now held a glimmer of genuine terror. "Losing battle?" he gasped, his voice cracking. "Are you saying, 'I am dying, physician'?" Ilara met his gaze with a somber, silent affirmation. He did not speak the words directly, but his silence, his weary expression, and the subtle inclination of his head conveyed the grim truth more powerfully than any pronouncement. The air in the chamber grew heavy, charged with the crushing weight of the revelation. For a long moment, Valerius lay utterly still, the wheezing of his breath the only sound. Then a strange transformation came over him. The fear in his eyes did not dissipate, but was quickly overshadowed by something far more sinister. A cold, incandescent rage. His body, despite its weakness, seemed to vibrate with suppressed fury. "Dying?" he hissed, the word a venomous whisper. "I am king. Kings do not simply die. This is a plot, a poison. You, Lysander, you wish to see me dead. You and that sniveling boy, Alaric." He pointed a trembling, accusation-laden finger at Lysander, his eyes blazing with a sudden irrational paranoia. Lysander recoiled, genuinely shocked. "Your Majesty, I swear upon my life, I have served you faithfully. This is a physician's diagnosis, not a conspiracy." Ilara stepped forward, his calm voice a stark contrast to the king's outburst. "Your Majesty, there is no poison, only the natural consequence of a life lived without moderation. Your humors are in disarray." But Valerius was beyond reason. His fevered mind had latched onto a convenient enemy, a scapegoat for his own mortality. "Lies! All lies! You conspire against me! I feel it! The betrayers infest my very court!" He struggled to sit up completely, his face a mask of distorted rage and fear. "Guards! Seize him! Seize Lysander! He plots against his king! He plots with Thorn! With Alaric!" The two palace guards, standing silently by the door, shifted uneasily. They looked to Lysander, then back to the king, clearly uncertain how to react to such a public, irrational outburst from their monarch. Lysander, though his heart hammered against his ribs, forced himself to remain outwardly calm. He knew this was the illness, the fever twisting the king's mind, but the threat was very real. Valerius, even in his diminished state, held absolute power. Your Majesty, please, consider what you say. I am your Chancellor. I have always protected the crown." "You protect yourself, traitor!" Valerius shrieked, a vein throbbing dangerously on his temple. "You wish to hasten my end, to place that pallid boy upon my throne. I will have your head, Lysander, and yours, physician, and then Alaric's, all of you." His voice broke into a fit of racking coughs, leaving him breathless and gasping, his body trembling with the effort of his fury. Ilara quickly moved to his side, offering a soothing cloth dipped in cool water, but Valerius swatted it away. "No! Bring me wine, something strong, something to quiet this clamor in my head, and send for Dubois. I wish for music, gaiety, not your grim faces and your pronouncements of doom." Lysander knew he had to act quickly, to placate the king, to divert his dangerous paranoia. "As your Majesty wishes," he said, his voice clipped. "Master Ilara will prescribe a soothing draught, and I shall send immediately for Master Dubois to arrange a grand entertainment to lift your Majesty's spirits." He bowed deeply, giving Ilara a desperate, pleading look. Ilara understood, nodding almost imperceptibly. He quickly mixed a potent opiate draught from his bag, the bitter scent of herbs filling the air. As Ilara pressed the cup to Valerius's lips, the king glared at Lysander, his eyes still burning with suspicion. "Remember this, Lysander," he slurred, after swallowing the medicine. "I see everything, even from my bed. No one shall usurp me, no one." The opiate began to take effect almost immediately, dulling the frantic edge of his paranoia. His body slumped back into the pillows, his breathing becoming heavier, more regular, though still raspy. He drifted into a restless, troubled sleep, mumbling incoherently about plots and betrayals. Lysander exited the bedchamber, his legs feeling weak beneath him. The guards quickly and silently closed the doors behind them. Ilara followed, his face grim. "He is gravely ill, Lord Chancellor," Ilara said, his voice low, as they walked away from the king's chambers. "The fever consumes him. His mind is disturbed. He will not last much longer. Days, perhaps weeks. The end is inevitable." Lysander felt a jolt, a mixture of relief and fresh anxiety. The inevitable. It was coming. But what horrors would the king inflict in his dying throes? And the paranoia, Master Ilara? Is it the fever? Or something deeper? Ilara sighed, rubbing his temples. "A cruel combination, Lord Chancellor. The fever exacerbates his existing nature. He has always been prone to suspicion. Now it is magnified 100-fold. He sees enemies everywhere, and as his strength wanes, his fear will only grow. He will lash out, brutally." "What am I to do?" Lysander murmured, more to himself than to the physician. "The kingdom teeters on the brink. The people starve. The provinces rebel. And Eldoria threatens war. And the king accuses me of treason." "You must survive, Lord Chancellor," Ilara said, his voice firm, his eyes piercing. "For the sake of the kingdom, for Prince Alaric. The king, in his madness, is a danger to all. His next outburst, his next decree, could plunge us into irreversible chaos." They stopped by a secluded window overlooking the palace gardens, shrouded in the persistent drizzle. The air felt cold, oppressive. Lysander gazed out at the gray landscape, his mind racing. He had to prepare. He had to protect the prince. But how? The king's accusations, even in his illness, carried a terrifying weight. He could not afford to be seen as a traitor. Not now, when the kingdom needed him most. As the physician departed, leaving Lysander alone in the quiet corridor, a new, unsettling thought solidified in his mind. The king's illness was a double-edged sword. It promised an end to Valerius's destructive reign, but it also presented an immediate, deadly threat. Valerius, dying and paranoid, was a trapped beast, capable of unimaginable cruelty in his final struggles.